Let's jump right into this explainer and decode the world of international hazardous area regulations. Today, we're answering one massive, foundational question. Who exactly writes the rules for hazardous areas? To really put the stakes into perspective, I want you to picture this. Somewhere on an FPSO, a floating production, storage, and offloading unit, out in the middle of the ocean right now, there is a junction box roughly the size of your fist. And that little box is literally standing between a stray electrical spark and a catastrophic explosion. Here's the crazy part, though. 6 completely different rulebooks decided exactly how that single tiny box gets built, installed, and inspected. So let's meet the regulatory bodies that hold this entire safety net together. We'll kick things off with Layer 1, the technical backbone, which is written by the IEC. The International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, writes the underlying technical foundation for basically everything we're going to cover today. But they don't just dump one giant manual on your desk. They break it down really systematically. At the base level, you've got IEC 60079-10-1, which tells you how to classify a hazardous location where flammable gas or reaper risks might actually show up. Once you've got your classification sorted, IEC 60079-14 steps in to tell you exactly how to design and install your electrical equipment safely inside that space. But, out on the ocean, you aren't just dealing with electricity. You're dealing with salt spray, constant vibration, and total isolation. So, IEC 6001892-7 and IEC 60092-505 take those exact baseline rules and adapt them specifically for fixed and mobile offshore petroleum units, as well as mobile offshore drilling units. Now let's cross the Atlantic for Layer 2, the parallel system run by the API. The American Petroleum Institute runs a parallel system dealing with the exact same physics. The API actually gives the petroleum industry 2 distinct paths to follow. On one side, API RP500 uses the traditional North American division system, breaking your hazards down into Division 1 and Division 2. On the other side, API RP505 relies on the zone system, which actually aligns really closely with the IEC methods we just talked about, dealing with zones 0, 1, and 2 based on ventilation and release grades. Remember, it's the exact same explosive physics, just a different regional dialect. And if you're operating globally, you absolutely have to learn how to translate between these frameworks, because an American-designed rig is likely going to use API, while an international rig will lean on the IEC. That brings us to Layer 3, the vessel, governed by the IMO and class societies. Okay, here is a really common failure mode that trips up a lot of seasoned engineers. Simply passing IEC or API standards does not automatically mean your junction box is cleared to go offshore. Why? Because of the extreme maritime environment. The International Maritime Organization, the IMO, uses frameworks like SOLAS and the MODU code to set the baseline safety for the vessel itself. But here's the catch. The IMO doesn't actually come out and inspect your ship. That job falls to independent class societies like DNV and ABS. They are the ones who verify your actual electrical design against their own rigorous maritime rules. For instance, DNV OS-D201 outlines very specific technical provisions to make sure your equipment can survive the harsh reality of being at sea. Let's just pause for a second and look at how this all stacks up, because you are actually managing 3 completely separate approvals here. First, you've got vessel safety, governed by the IMO, which is purely focused on the platform's baseline survival. Second is equipment safety, dictated by the IEC, API, and those class societies, focusing strictly on hardware design and safe installation. And third is worker safety, which is a perfect segue into our next major layer. Let's look at Layer 4, the regional overlay, which introduces ATEX. European geography adds a whole other set of mandatory regulations into our mix. If your offshore unit trades in Europe or is stationed in European waters, the ATEX directives come into full effect. Now, ATEX is unique because it's statutory, meaning it's literally written into European law. Directive 2014/34/EU governs the equipment itself, making sure it won't be an ignition source. But just as importantly, Directive 1999/92/EC dictates exactly how your workers are allowed to handle and operate that equipment in explosive atmospheres. It perfectly bridges the gap between hardware engineering and daily human operations. So, how do we make sense of all this? Let's talk about the synthesis, the X passport. To synthesize all of this overlapping regulation, I want you to think of this system like an international passport for your equipment. Your IEC compliance, well, that's your base identity document. It proves who you are and that you are fundamentally safe. API is just a regional dialect of that same identity. But the IMO, class societies like DNV, and regional laws like ATEX, those are the specific visa stamps you need to actually operate in a given body of water. Skip even one of those stamps, and your multi-million-dollar installation is getting rejected at the gate. All right, time for a quick pop quiz to see how we're tracking. Let's apply this to a real-world scenario. Say your FPSO travels between an oil field in West Africa and a port in Rotterdam. Which of these regulatory frameworks apply to your electrical equipment? If you guessed all 5 of them simultaneously, you nailed it. You need IEC 6079 for your base technical design, IE 61892 for the offshore application, your class society rules to actually certify the build, IMO for the overall vessel safety, and because you're sailing into Rotterdam, you absolutely must comply with ATEX for that European leg. This just proves that every single X-rated decision you make traces back to these interconnected bodies working together. You can't just pick your favorite one, you have to satisfy the whole ecosystem. Before this explainer, you might have just seen a pile of confusing acronyms stamped onto a piece of metal. But now you can see exactly how they lock together. They aren't competing with each other at all, they are layering on top of one another to form an impenetrable shield. It's this exact, highly structured, redundant system of rules that keeps a multi-billion-dollar offshore asset from experiencing a catastrophic explosion. So now you know exactly who writes the rules and how they overlap to protect us. But it begs a rather chilling question. If a massive offshore asset actually does experience a catastrophic explosion, which of these overlapping safety nets failed first? Keep that in the back of your mind as we prepare to dive into the raw physics of the fire triangle and explosive limits in our next explainer.